Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. So, if you're a 6th grade history student, or really just anyone who loves a good historical mystery, you are in for a treat today. We're going to dive into what I like to call a secret powerhouse of the ancient world. Seriously, this civilization is so fascinating, it honestly feels like something straight out of an adventure movie. We're talking about the hidden empire, the Kingdom of Kush.
Okay, let me ask you a question. What if I told you that there was an ancient African kingdom that built their own pyramids and actually conquered ancient Egypt? Crazy, right? I mean, you've probably spent tons of time learning all about the pharaohs and mummies in Egypt. But right next door was this absolute juggernaut of an empire that completely flipped the script. It's like a massive historical plot twist, except it's 100% true.
Now, to wrap our heads around this epic story, we got to look at exactly where it all went down. The ancient African kingdom of Kush basically flourished right along the famous Nile River. If you pulled out a modern map today, you'd find the heart of Kush right smack in the middle of what is now the country of Sudan, and it stretched all the way up into southern Egypt. Because they shared that same life-giving river with the Egyptians, it perfectly set the stage for, well, a pretty spectacular rivalry, and a partnership too.
All right, before we go any further, we need to clear something up, because history books can get kind of confusing if you don't have a cheat sheet. Kush actually goes by a few different names depending on who you're reading. It's an ancient African kingdom that is also known as Nubia. Sometimes it's spelled Kush with a C or referred to as Upper Nubia. So if you're doing homework later and you see the word Nubia, just remember, they are talking about the exact same powerhouse kingdom we're looking at right now.
And let me tell you, this kingdom was definitely not a flash in the pan. Kush first emerges way back around 2500 BCE. Think about that. That's over 4,000 years ago. Then, you skip forward to 747 BCE and they literally conquer Egypt. Fast forward a bit more, they enter what's called the Merowe period around 300 BCE, before eventually facing a decline in the 4th century CE. Guys, we are talking about a civilization that thrived for almost 3,000 years. That is an insanely long time for any empire to stay on top.
So how exactly did they survive and honestly thrive for so many centuries? Well, it essentially boils down to one thing: wealth on the Nile. Kush's immense prosperity didn't just happen by magic. Sure, they hit the geographic jackpot, but they were also incredibly savvy. Their success was directly tied to strategically controlling the vital trade routes running up and down the Nile River. Simply put, if you wanted to move goods anywhere through this part of the ancient world, you had to go through Kush.
And what exactly were they trading to get so filthy rich? We're talking gold, ivory, and precious stones. Because they had direct access to these highly valuable resources, the Kushites became unbelievably wealthy merchants. They completely dominated the ancient economy in this region. Honestly, they weren't just a kingdom, they were essentially the ancient world's ultimate luxury suppliers.
With all that incredible wealth pouring in, they obviously needed a spectacular capital city, right? Enter Napata. Napata wasn't just, a fancy place for the king to hang out. It was a bustling, booming epicenter of political power and trade. Thanks to all that wealth we just talked about, Napata naturally attracted diplomats, politicians, and merchants from all over. It was basically a thriving global hub of the ancient world.
Which actually brings us to their absolute ultimate power move, conquering ancient Egypt. Remember earlier when I said they flipped the script? Well, for centuries, the Kushite civilization was actually deeply influenced by ancient Egyptian culture. They traded with them, they learned from them, and then they just decided to completely take over. The neighbors to the south marched right on north and became the rulers of the exact same Egyptian empire they had lived next to for so long. Talk about a plot twist.
Now, there is one key number that really defines this whole era, and that number is 25. When Kush conquered Egypt, they didn't just rush in, smash things up, and leave. Not at all. They stayed, they fully integrated, and they ruled as the 25th dynasty, or as it's also known, the Kushite dynasty.
So let's break down exactly what that actually means, because their impact was huge. Ruling Egypt from 747 to 656 BCE, which is almost an entire century, by the way, they didn't just sit on the throne looking pretty, they left a serious, lasting imprint. They deeply influenced Egyptian art, they helped shape Egyptian religion, and they fundamentally impacted Egyptian politics. You essentially had Kushite kings ruling as Egyptian pharaohs, seamlessly blending these two incredible cultures together into one. Now, eventually, their time ruling Egypt did come to an end. But don't worry, the Kingdom of Kush was far from over. In fact, they just moved their capital further south to a city called Meroe. And this is where they transformed from just wealthy traders and conquerors into absolute technological masterminds.
You see, while their early capital of Napata focused heavily on trade and political power, Meroe was a whole different ballgame. They shifted their focus almost entirely to iron smelting, highly skilled craftsmen, and oh yeah, pyramids. It brilliantly illustrates how a civilization can adapt and level up over time. They didn't just stubbornly stick to the same old playbook. They invented, they built, and they literally engineered their way into the future.
During this golden age of Meroe, which lasted from around 300 BCE all the way to 350 CE, they completely mastered the cutting-edge technology of the ancient world. I'm talking about advanced iron smelting. This booming new industry fueled incredibly skilled craftsmen and actually allowed their rulers to build distinctive, uniquely shaped pyramids that were entirely their own specific style. So yes, surprise, Kush built pyramids too.
But, history is full of rises and falls. Even the most powerful, brilliant, and ridiculously wealthy ancient empires eventually run into serious trouble. After thriving for literally thousands of years, the great kingdom of Kush finally began to weaken. So let's take a look at exactly what caused a kingdom this powerful to start writing its final chapter.
By the time the 4th century CE rolled around, things were really unwinding, and it was mainly due to 3 big reasons. First up, environmental changes. The climate and the landscape just shifted, which made it way harder to grow enough food to sustain their massive population. Second, internal conflicts. Struggles for power from within slowly began to tear the kingdom apart. And finally, step 3 was pressure from outside powers, specifically the rising kingdom of Aksum, and just a little group called the Roman Empire started pushing in hard on their borders. So this brutal combination of nature, internal politics, and outside forces eventually caused Kush to fade from prominence.
But here's the thing. Fading from prominence definitely does not mean disappearing forever. As one historian puts it, today, the ancient ruins of Kushite cities, temples, and pyramids stand as testaments to the kingdom's once great civilization. The remnants of their culture are still out there. Remember those distinctive Meroid pyramids we just talked about? Yeah, they are literally still there today, standing strong in the desert, preserving the legacy of Kush for future generations to explore.
So, to all you 6th grade historians out there, I want to leave you with one final thought. If a kingdom this amazingly powerful, a civilization that ruled for thousands of years, mastered iron, built their own pyramids, and conquered ancient Egypt, could somehow fade into a hidden secret of history, well, what other forgotten empires are just waiting out there to be explored? Keep digging, keep asking questions, and never stop exploring. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.